Man has thought deeply about the metaphysical and moral questions of our existence since the beginning of civilized thought. Questions such as, why are we different from animals? How have we come to exist? When is it right to kill another? In general, what is the moral standard which we must all live by? The first part of the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, provides the answer to that question. It lists our natural rights, and in doing so, it lays out the moral basis which we must all follow. The sophists of ancient Greece followed a peculiar form of relativism, which basically stated that man is the measure of all things. In his critique on this, Professor Alistair MacIntyre said, Plato interprets this as referring to sense perception and as meaning that things seem to be to an individual percipient, so they are to him. There is no being hot or being cold as such. There is simply seeming hot to this man, or seeming cold to that man. So it makes no sense to ask of a wind which feels warm to one man but chilly to another, is it really hot or cold? The wind is nothing really. It is to each whatever it appears to each. End quote. However, this cannot be the same with moral values, as the sophists taught. If this doctrine was true, but someone else disagreed, then both statements would somehow be simultaneously correct. And that would be true with any other two conflicting arguments as well. Reason tells us that this is not possible. Thus, one must conclude that there is truth. That being said, the universal truths which we all ought to live by are that all men are created equal, and that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Obviously, these ideas are based on the Declaration of Independence, but far deeper than that, they are based on the existence of God. In The Grand Inquisitor, Dostoevsky wrote, "If God does not exist, then everything is permitted." That is to mean, if there is no higher power holding us to a certain standard of morality, then there would be no meaning to morality. This would also mean that there are no universal truths, for if there is no morality, then each man would be free to make up their own truth. Life in general would have no meaning. If everyone just passed out of existence when they die, then what ultimate meaning can be given to life? Anything that we did in life would have no effect on where we or anyone else went, that is, nothingness. Therefore, we might as well live our lives however we please. We all just cease to exist in the end anyway. Immortality or lack thereof aside, if there is no God, then there can be no objective standards of right and wrong, and one would not be able to judge Adolf Hitler in an absolute sense. Granted, an atheist could still say that we have a conscience inside each of us, assuring us that what Hitler did was wrong, but by the argument of social Darwinism, these values have been created by socio-biological evolution and environmental conditioning. If that is all moral values are, do they really have any meaning? Atheists, though they have no basis to do so, cannot and do not live in that kind of world. Bertrand Russell, a well-known atheist, is also an outspoken social critic. Russell himself acknowledges his inconsistency, saying that he finds his own ideals incredible, for he could not live as though ethical values were simply a matter of personal choice. Men who do not believe in God make leaps to affirm that there is a value to morality, that there is an objective right and wrong, revealing that the world their ideology creates is inadequate to satisfy humans. Of course, it is entirely possible for this to all be true, but many historical philosophers have asserted that there is an ultimate benevolent God. Thomas Aquinas, in his famous book Summa Theologica, provided a logical argument for the existence of God. In the first part, he lays out 5 logical reasons for his existence. The first states that everything in nature is set in motion by something else already in motion. So, it stands to reason that there had to be a first mover, or prime mover. He would have had to have been all-powerful to set things in motion for the first time, and such a being is defined as God. The second is similar. It explains that through the nature of cause and effect, it is necessary to assume a first, or ultimate cause, for nothing can be the cause of itself. For then the thing would have come before itself, which makes no sense. Thus, there must have been a first cause, and to this everyone gives the name of God. The third argument is that in nature we observe that things can either exist or not exist, as they come into existence and pass out of it. Things could not always have existed, though, because time is finite. Thus, we can conclude that there had to have been a time when nothing existed. However, if nothing existed at one time, and because nothing comes from nothing, we find it necessary to conclude that there is at least one necessary being which causes other things to exist, and which somehow exists outside of our understanding of time. This necessary being is God. The fourth comes from how everything that we label as good, true, hot, etc. is labeled relative to something better, truer, hotter, etc. Thus, there must be an ultimate form of all those adjectives, that which is best. To this we give the name of God. The fifth way is seen by the curious efficiency with which natural, non-intelligent things operate. The bird's wing, for example, carries out the task of flight perfectly. Quote, "Now whatever lacks intelligence cannot move towards an end, unless it be directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is shot to its mark by the archer. Therefore, some intelligent being exists, by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God." End quote. He argues that because natural bodies have such perfect design used efficiently to achieve a specific end, there must be a great designer who created the body in this way. The rights stated in the Declaration of Independence, along with property rights, can be derived from some of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not murder. If one man were not equal in rights and value to another, and was instead better than another and somehow had more natural rights, then it would be perfectly okay for him to kill the other man. However, rather than saying thou shalt not murder unless you are inherently more valuable and better than the victim, it simply states thou shalt not murder, implying that one man is not worth more than another, and they both have a right to live. Thou shalt not steal. Along with thou shalt not murder, this discounts the philosophical application of Darwinian survival of the fittest, which states that the strongest can take from the weaker, simply because they are stronger, and the weak cannot defend themselves well enough. However, God does not see things this way. He clearly has established that humans have the right to work and earn and keep what they earn, and no man can take from what another has earned, at least not without some sort of penalty. Thou shalt not cover your neighbor's house, nor your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey. Basically, this just reinforces the property rights argument. While being jealous of what another has is fairly natural, God understands that this may lead some to theft, and that would violate the previous commandment. So, God orders us to guard ourselves against feelings of jealousy. If the 10 Commandments are not enough to demonstrate God's backing of all men being equal, there are other places in the Bible which state we are all equal in His law. For example, Romans 2:14 through 15 states, "Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness." This is stating that these laws are natural, and all men equally have them and must act according to them. Another Bible verse arguing for all men being equal is Galatians 3:18. "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free man, there is neither male nor female, for all are in Christ Jesus." This quote clearly lays out that to him, race does not matter, nor does social status, nor sex, for they are all equal in his eyes. The moral value which drives us all to help others and be kind to them also connects back to the fact that all men are equal in rights. We do not like to see others in pain, and we want to help them because we understand that they are worth no less than we. Jesus himself stated, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." We would want people to help us when we are down or in pain, so we should do the same for others. Though these truths are what we all ought to live by, we do not always do so. Why is that? One of the greatest questions philosophers have asked is the simple question, why do humans ask what they ought to do, or question themselves on whether or not what we are doing is right, rather than simply act on every impulse we have? What separates us from animals is our conscience. Animals have appetites, and they act to satisfy those appetites. No moral qualms there. Humans, however, do not have things nearly as easy. Humans ask the question, what ought I to do, when considering morally questionable actions? In a previously stated Bible quote, the answer to this question is provided. Romans 2:14 states, "They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness." Men have a conscience in their hearts, a small voice in them that ensures it is wrong to steal, murder, break promises, lie, or in any way hurt another or infringe on their rights. The conscience mostly comes from a person's upbringing, which is why we must be taught to act rightly. However, a child who is not brought up to act rightly still has some understanding of right and wrong, whether they follow it or not, reinforcing the fact that God's law is written in our hearts. Of course, people still kidnap, steal from, and murder others on a daily basis. This is because the conscience can be ignored, shut out, and muffled until it just dies. People avoid doing what they know is right and instead do what they know they should not because of what they want. When some people want to seek pleasure, personal gain, avoid pain, or seek revenge, they act on these desires and ignore their conscience. Thus, to recap, the central idea here is that all men are created equal in rights and their value as people. Those rights are the right to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. These rights are God-given and thus cannot be given or taken away unless an individual breaks certain laws. There is no question as to what these laws are. God's law is written into everyone's heart in the form of a conscience. Some people's conscience get broken down and weakened from being repeatedly ignored, but even then, people still know the basics of what is right and wrong. The broader term which encompasses all morality, then, is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Questions?
Sometimes in a philosophical presentation, there isn't immediate applause because we're still digesting. Oh yeah, that's right.
Oh yes. Early on in your talk, you cited that reason tells us that two conflicting ideas or perspectives cannot be true at the same time. So if I, for example, ask you to take that red marker and draw a big red dot on that whiteboard up there, one person might say, I see a whiteboard with a red dot, and another person might say, I see the coat of paint with white background around it. So you have two different perspectives. So it's a simple little example, but I think two perspectives can be true, conflict at the same time.
Okay.
My question would be, can reason be relied on to prove which one is right, which one is wrong?
It could. In this particular case, one could just erase the red dot and show that it is not a red board with a white dot, or where everything else is white, but instead a white board, and for someone to put a red dot on it. In moral situations, or there cannot be two conflicting ideologies because they just two conflicting ideologies cannot exist at the same time. They cannot both be true at the same time. They exist. But capitalism and socialism cannot both be in the same system.
That's a well-reasoned argument.
So you had said that there are rights can't be taken away unless you violate certain laws, and then you said that there's no question about what these laws are because they're written into our consciences. Is that correct?
Right.
Are all our consciences the same?
Not in every way. Actually, historically, they've been wrong. I mean, someone would feel guilty for helping a slave escape when that's not necessarily wrong because of social upbringing. And that's why I said that a child must be brought up to act rightly. But not all of it. Some of it is just ingrained. I mean, we all understand on some level that that it's wrong to steal or kill at will. And
So since our consciences need to be instructed, we need to be careful how those consciences are built, right? And if you just argue, well, they're built by a good conscience. Your parents need a good conscience. Well, their parents need a good conscience. So how do we discover that reliable standard of a good conscience by which all others should be modeled and instructed?
the culture is, the culture must be in the right for people to act rightly. The culture has changed. It used to be, at least in the South, that slavery was okay, and abolitionists were looked down upon and broken down. And now, owning slaves would be considered extremely wrong by everyone, not just the authorities.
So if culture instructs conscience, then culture is actually the moral authority, not conscience.
The thing is, with slavery, reason played into it, and they reasoned that black people cannot be the same as white people. They just cannot, so they're less human. But so when you're conflicting what is true or with reason, it gets problems occur. It gets muddled. If you don't believe that a person is human, then they're not equal to you, right?
So beliefs are ultimate.
Right. But the culture seems to decide many beliefs, such as slavery.
You had mentioned in your speech an atheist, and you quoted him. I didn't quite catch what you quoted him. Could you say it again? I just wanted to think about what he said. I didn't catch it.
It wasn't really a quote. I just basically said that he finds his own ideals incredible because he could not live as though personal choice was he could not live as though ethical values were a matter of personal choice. And he realized that was inconsistent with atheism, even though he was atheist.
Okay, so he was saying that there is no God, but it doesn't make sense because I'm living as if there was one.
In a sense, yeah.
Okay. The mention of Thomas Aquinas would bring up the idea that Aquinas, would rely heavily upon Aristotle, who he would call the philosopher. And then the next several references had to do with statements from the New Testament. Do we, as a people, all across the board, have any reason to worry, for example, that a guy like Aquinas had to rely so heavily on the pagan philosopher Aristotle?
Just because Aristotle was a pagan doesn't mean that what he philosophized was wrong. He didn't philosophize in the existence he didn't philosophize necessarily in the existence of God that Thomas Aquinas was. But he did provide a good logical basis. I acknowledge that you would have to accept the Christian God and the Christian Bible in my thesis, as Thomas Aquinas' argument could be for any religion. Basically, it just states that there had to have been a prime mover. And so I acknowledge that it could be stated for any God, but I also state that this is what I believe, and this is what comes from the Christian God, and it does have very good effects.
But don't you think that, following on that Aquinas' reliance on the philosopher, a pagan, is towards your last point, that the requirements of the law are written on our heart, and therefore I think that's what you just find as our conscience. And so this is something universal that, did you come back around to that, or that we can kind of make that as a universal truth, that pagan or no, the fundamentals are there?